I'd like to talk a little bit about feng shui. We usually think of feng shui in terms of sensitivity to the outer environment, like how we set up our rooms or houses, which way our bed's facing, where the windows are, and so forth. I learned the essence of what I know about feng shui from His Eminence Tai Situ Rinpoche, one of the four main regents of the Karma Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism. Situ Rinpoche visited our center a number of times years ago, and he freely shared his love and knowledge of feng shui with us. And for me, it was like a transmission, and I immediately got it. And I even wrote a book about it after a while. Anyway, among other things, Taisido Rinpoche took us on a tour of our home, pointing out areas of the house that compromised the sense of peaceful living space we're trying to achieve. And while feng shui can be as complex as you want it to be, and I've got dozens of books on it, what I learned from Situ Rinpoche boils down simply to this, and maybe I can share that with you. We need to become aware of our own innate sensitivity to space. Instinctively, we know if we will just relax and trust ourselves. Let me give you a simple example. If I walk through a doorway from a house or coming entranceway or whatever into an adjoining room, and immediately inside the room there's a tall lamp that's so close to my head that some part of my mind cringes or is forced to notice and be aware and protect myself from it. That's the essence right there of bad feng shui. I just remove the lamp, or at least move the lamp back far enough till I no longer notice it, till it no longer impinges on my consciousness. Now for me, that's the essence of feng shui. Arranging your environment to your taste until your mind is at peace within it. I know this is probably an oversimplification, but sensitivity to space is something that we all have, and we can rather easily become aware of it. And like with so many things, and what all these videos are about is awareness is key. If we don't have awareness, we're just not going to pick up on very much of anything. Awareness is the key to responding, what's called responsibility, the ability to respond. If we can't respond to a situation, there's nothing we can do to change it. So awareness is important. And we like to think of feng shui as having to do with what's outside of us, the outside world, our chairs and tables and entranceways and gardens, and its effect on us. But feng shui really doesn't have such boundaries like that. And it's just as active and true within our mind as it is outside, elsewhere. In fact, we might even have more in common with one another regarding inner feng shui, with our inner space, than we have similarities in how we arrange our living room furniture. Mental and inner feng shui is at least as important as paying attention to the outside world. Now I want to talk about something, what the Tibetans call the three poisons. I've been actively meditating, or trying to, since 1974, when the Venerable Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche took me into a room and taught me how to do it. Now, I happen to be a really slow learner in meditation, and after so many years, I have managed to learn a little bit. My mind is somewhat more stable than it was back then, and I have learned to allow my mind to rest, at least to a degree. But this mental stability does not necessarily extend. I mean, whatever I've learned from meditation doesn't necessarily extend to what the Buddhists call the kleshas, which also we would call the disturbing emotions, or emotional afflictions, or as they call it commonly, the three poisons. And we all know them their anger or aggression, desire and attachment, passion, and delusions, various kinds of ignorance. And keep in mind that ignorance comes from the word ignore. So if you want to know what the key to ignorance is, it's just those things we ignore, that we're unaware of, and we're unable to or unwilling to develop an awareness of, so that we could be responsible to them. Anyway, many Buddhists call them the 5 poisons because they also add the kleshas of jealousy and pride. These 3 or 5 poisons are not just considered run-of-the-mill problems or routine obstacles or mental obscurations, but rather they're deep-seated, powerful emotions, afflictions that tend to control us more than we control them, should we indulge in them, which most of us do. It's said that for each of us, there is one of these poisons that's dominant. So you can look inside yourself and literally choose your poison. These 3 poisons can not only be destructive, they're also powerful. They're huge. They're huge sources of energy, for good or bad, for good or ill. Just imagine what great vortices these are, energy-wise. If they can move us so easily to such extremes, like getting furious or something, look at the energy that's broadcast or freed, in an extreme temper fit. And these kleshas, these 3 poisons, are never very far from us in the mind, as we all know. So inner feng shui makes good sense. Just even a split second or a moment's lapse on our part, and the poisons are there, good to go, fully present. For example, anger can appear in a moment, in a nanosecond. So we kind of have to tiptoe through the pastures of life, being careful where we step. I guess my point is that, like the proverbial elephant in the room that we all talk about, these poisons are very much with us. They're close at hand, not just some distant possibility. And in the inner landscape of our mind, they're like, these are major features to avoid. And their constant presence is something that we all are aware of, even if only so that we can better ignore them. Now, talk about bad feng shui. These 3 poisons, these kleshas, impinge on our consciousness at all times. I mean, they're constantly right there in a threatening mode. I mean, you can ask yourself, what does it take to set you off? What does it take to get you angry? Or if you don't want to go to full anger, just what does it take to irritate you? I can probably manage that. So anyway, these poisons are never really not there, but are always prominent in our peripheral vision, just in the peripheral vision, just out of sight, but never out of mind. In other words, beginning meditation or any kind of meditation, we must learn to be mindful, lest we just simply fall victim to these kleshas. And so we can look at these kleshas the same way we look at feng shui analysis. So I'll say a little bit more about feng shui. I'm using anger as an example, but all of the kleshas, all of the poisons are right here within our mind. And of course, we ignore them as much as possible. But they're also like fountains of energy that have been painted over by the veneer of society, coat upon coat, painting ourselves into a corner where we don't have to see or react to them. But we all have them. And the kleshas are hidden in various clever ways. Of course, as I mentioned, they're buried beneath social taboos or forbidden by law. We are warned not to go there, not to give in to these feelings of anger or whatever. The law forbids it. We are warned not to do it, or we suffer serious penalties if we do. Take, for instance, anger. We are asked not to indulge in anger, and we are warned, and there are consequences if we do. Law after law is on the books. So we kind of cap off these energy sources, these kleshas, these poisons. We kind of hide them away and make them punishable offenses. In polite society, we just don't go there. We don't, and we keep the various extreme effects of these poisons at arm's length, and we don't like anyone who gives in to them. And they become a pariah. Yet this ignorance, this ignoring and keeping at arm's length is only like a cosmetic solution. It doesn't really do anything about disarming the kleshas, disarming the three poisons. Ignoring the obvious is just not enough. In our current condition, there's no way we can cope with, much less subdue, poisons like anger or desire. It's like grabbing a tiger by the tail. So we habitually turn our gaze away. This is just like the way civilized society behaves. Perhaps the most common solution is to keep qualities like anger and desire hidden, or at least at arm's length, to get as far away from them as we possibly can and to avoid them at every opportunity and perhaps at all costs. Although society finds this approach necessary, we should not conclude that keeping our distance from them, from these kleshas, in any way diminishes their power over us. It's just not true. In other words, shunning kleshas just, is a cosmetic and not any kind of permanent solution. But society considers it much better than indulging in them. Living in a world where we must permanently ignore these great energy centers in ourselves also is not good. Talk about bad feng shui. Just think for a moment how these powerful sources, how they impinge on our consciousness. I mean, they're just always there. We must forever be on guard. We must be careful not to give them any of our attention, not to give in to them, lest they erupt. So they forever have the minimum attention it takes for us to ignore them. And they have us walking kind of around with our eyes downcast, as not to see or invoke them unnecessarily. See no evil, hear no evil, and so forth. I'm just saying, let's not minimize the dangers of kleshas either. It's really a no-win situation. We ignore these poisons, these kleshas, at our own peril. And yet if we go with them, if we give them our attention, we usually end up being controlled by them. They take us over. We lose our temper, smash something, say things we don't mean. So tell me this is not one kind of definition for suffering. If this is not suffering, I don't know what is, and everyone does it. It's kind of like a world populated by emotional landmines. Kleshas are always present, and we have to watch our every step. Society has learned to carefully avoid the obvious ones, locking them away with legalities and laws, or painting them over with taboos and coatings of social veneer. Be nice, You would hardly know they're there when you're at like a social event in nice society because they're not tolerated. But they're there nevertheless, and they're just beneath the surface of polite, and wishing them away won't make it so. So sooner or later in this life, or in another, as the Buddhists say, we will have to come to terms with our kleshas and all of that energy. They're waiting for us. And in mind training, learning to handle the kleshas directly is reserved for advanced meditators only, so I'm told. In this just introductory talk, I'm just pointing out that only our inner and mental space, I'm pointing out that our inner and mental space is as important to us as what's outside. In fact, we spend most of our time in the mind, looking inward, thinking to ourselves, talking, not just out in the world doing things. So the mind becomes the lens and ultimately the projector through in which the outer world appears to us. And like outer conventional feng shui, where we arrange furniture and stuff, much of what we find in our inner mental space can also make us feel very uncomfortable and certainly amounts to bad feng shui. It's enough here to just to note that within the mind are some very large energy sources, the three poisons, and they are very close by, but usually ignored or even avoided. They're there nonetheless, and they're prominent at that. According to the Buddhists, ultimately the five poisons, or the three poisons, can and must be known and transmuted into the five wisdoms. This is the teaching and this is the practice. Sooner or later, someday, each of us will have to do it. As for altering or removing these kleshas, what we could call these obstacles, I'll leave that for another talk. But there should be interest in it because it can be done. Mental feng shui, our inner comfort, mental comfort, our inner peace is at least as important as rearranging the deck chairs on our personal outer life, which ultimately will be abandoned anyway. So that's just something to think about.